Modern feminist media is obsessed with the idea of the strong woman. But what if it's been missing the point all along? Feminism is one of the most powerful political movements in the world from the past century. From securing women the right to vote to rearranging the entire economy in just a few decades, it's changed the foundations of societies all around the world and how we relate to each other and ourselves. Outside of the many legal battles, the movement nowadays mainly focuses on women's presentation in the media and narratives around women's experiences. A lot of this media, from TV shows to movies, is especially obsessed with the strong woman narrative, which is fine on its own, but after some time it gets repetitive, and it doesn't leave much space to explore other angles. These kinds of stories miss out on the many nuances of women's status in society, and the many different ways of expression. But a forgotten Japanese movie from the 1960s hit the nail on the head before feminism became a household name. Carmen from Kawachi offers a stark, well-developed look at the shifts of women's place in the world, offering a female protagonist unlike anything in modern feminist media. The director, Seijun Suzuki, appreciated by film buffs and movie critics alike for his crime and yakuza films, spearheaded the Japanese new wave of cinema that heavily criticized Japanese society. These movies, popular for their eccentricity and avant-garde theatrics, will go on to inspire other filmmakers such as Quentin Tarantino and Jim Jarmusch, who himself once said, "The beauty of life is in small moments, not big events." In this forward-thinking movie, Suzuki painted a portrait of the lives of Japanese women that, while of course action-packed and exaggerated like many of his other previous works, was really way ahead of its time in its cultural critiques. So why has it largely been ignored by Western audiences who seem to eat this sort of thing up? You see, Carmen isn't merely a film about strong, independent women. Her plucky personality, her drive to persist in the face of incredible difficulty, and the development she goes through as a character throughout the film's 89-minute runtime are truly something to behold. And yet, in spite of all this, and the fact that Carmen was one of Suzuki's lesser-known works, it provides one of the most poignant and forward-thinking deep dives into the difference between men and women in all of media. The main reason why Carmen from Kawachi lacks widespread appeal, like some of Suzuki's other films, is due to the fact that in 1966, the A-B movie system was common in Japan, especially at Nikatsu, where he made his debut. There would often be a first to play at the double feature, the A, and then a B movie that was usually more experimental, so mainly dedicated fans would stick around to watch. On top of that, at the time, Suzuki was known for his raunchy, pulpy crime movies, and was a rather controversial artist. Most of the Japanese film industry saw his movies as nonsense, to the point where his movie Branded to Kill, the following year, got him fired from the studio. On top of that, there were already established directors making more feminist/women-centric films, such as Mikio Naruse, Kenji Mizoguchi, and even Shohei Imamura. In a lot of depictions of feminism, women's struggles against oppression in film, in my opinion, tend to fall into one or two camps. Either you have a woman who's passively receiving this treatment, as was common in movies with women as their primary subjects started to gain more appeal in the 1960s, or, at least in the US, they focus on women dominating capitalist structures, using their femininity as a weapon. These sorts of movies think that critiquing gender roles in our society through film are as simple as flipping the script, as it were, showing women in positions of power while men are subjugated, or having women enter into typically male-dominated professions and succeeding, with the truth of women's often squandered potential in society being laid bare for everyone to see. Take, for example, Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. She's preppy, cute, blonde woman who loves pink, adores her chihuahua, and so people assume she's kinda dumb. She's underestimated, but throughout the film she shows some real girl power. She started out trying to win back her ex by becoming a lawyer, and at the end triumphs as a successful lawyer. Or, for another example, look at Gone Girl, another great movie that subverts gender expectations. But the main character, Amy Dunn, falls into the trap too deep and is consumed in her quest for revenge against her unfaithful husband. Carmen from Kawachi goes a step further and turns gendered expectations in the world of men and women completely on its head in the process. Carmen from Kawachi paints a much more realistic, yet much bleaker picture of our protagonist's situation, where there isn't as much of a happy ending, and yet at the same time, she comes out the other side a fully fleshed out, well-developed character. Carmen from Kawachi starts off as a movie about a young woman coming of age and the trauma she suffers at the hands of a male-dominated society in 1960s Japan. But as the plot progresses, and we see our main characters develop, it turns into something much more than that. Carmen from Kawachi centers around Tsuyuko, a high school senior from Kawachi, a rural town in western Japan. She learns from her friend Ineko that her former classmate Yuki is doing well working in the nightlife scene of nearby Osaka, the largest city in western Japan. As the two make their way to school, she runs into her love interest, a young man by the name of Bon. At first he seems reluctant to acknowledge it, but later we see him holding the flower that she gifted him. After school, the two talk about their future plans, with Suyu unsure of what she wants to do, and Bon decidedly headed off to college. In the meantime, two boys, secret admirers of Suyuko, watch jealously from afar as the couple spend their time together. When the two part ways, the boys concoct a plan to kidnap Suyuko and have their way with her. Suyu is, naturally, horribly traumatized by this, and this is where the conflict of gender roles really begins to bloom in the film. She cries to her father about it, but he absent-mindedly seems to brush it off. A bit later, Suyuko confronts her mother, having caught her cheating on her father with the local priest, with her father's knowledge. To wash away the woes of a long day, Suyuko takes a hot bath. Her sister Senko comes around on her way to go visit a friend. Before Senko can leave, Suyuko runs by her the idea to leave for Osaka, to which Senko says, "If you leave, our family will fall apart." With her faith in her family shattered, Suyuko decides to follow in her former classmates' footsteps and makes the leap to Osaka. In Osaka, she begins to work at a cabaret called Club Dada, a sort of nightclub where patrons can enjoy food, song, dance, and theatrical entertainment. Seemingly part of the burgeoning nightlife industry, it's rife with all sorts of debauchery and exploitation. The cabaret has brought on a new class of women to act as the entertainers, to decide which one of them is going to become their new quote-unquote Carmen, the front woman for the establishment. Suyuko is blatantly uncomfortable with this environment, with patrons and bar staff alike pointing out that she's a bumpkin, even saying that she smells like a potato recently pulled out of the ground. She gets drunk, and over the course of the night becomes somewhat more friendly with one of the frequent guests of the bar, Kanzo. Kanzo says that he's also from Kawachi like Suyuko, and they start to bond over it. With this, she begins, ever so slightly, to come out of her shell. The night, the drinking, the singing and dancing continue until we get to the next day, where Suyuko wakes up in the same bed as Kanzo, waking up with no memory of the night before. I can't help but feel bad for her. Side note, I really appreciate the use of mirrors and lights in this scene, and I think Suzuki did a great job portraying the exploitation of women, as well as societal standards and expectations excellently, by framing his shot around Kanzo's face here and Suyuko's expression. Suyuko continues to work at the bar and speaks with Kanzo again, clearly resenting him for the night before, and asks him not to speak to anyone from Kawachi about their quote-unquote affair. He admits that he made up the story about being from Kawachi and goes on to admit he's fallen for her, despite that fact, and despite the fact that apparently he wasn't her first time. Suyuko puts a distance between the two of them, ignoring Kanzo on her way home from work after the night ends. Work continues as per usual, and Suyuko seems to really be getting used to it. She laughs and jokes with her coworkers about men, and how they feel like after their first night with a woman, she becomes theirs forever. An interesting, and in my opinion, unexplored side of the types of conversations women have about men among themselves. This moment, along with Kanzo's previous confession of love, shows Suyuko in a much greater position of power and control than her circumstances might let on. It's not the same as the other examples of feminist media, where we see women either succumbing to the darker sides of human nature, or we see a woman succeeding in male-dominated fields in spite of, or maybe because of, misconceptions about them. Instead, this dynamic points to Suyuko making the best of a bad situation, outsmarting those around her, and stepping out of the boundaries expected of her in a new way. Not only as a woman, but also as a woman from the countryside coming to the big city. Later on, we find out that Kanzo is waiting for Suyuko outside in the rain, not having the money to get into the club. So for Kanzo, his access to Suyuko isn't based on him solely as a man, but based on what's in his wallet. It creates a schism in this male-dominated society, where men and women are both treated as resources for the people who are really in charge. In this case, the owners of Club Dada. Suyuko later meets her friend from earlier in the film, who now works as a model at a fashion agency, and even asks Suyuko if she would like to become a model one day, with Suyuko saying she's content to work at the cabaret. Nightlife must go on, and Suyuko becomes a star of the nightclub in her own right, delivering an incredible vocal performance, outshining other women at the bar. It's clear that she's become their new Carmen at last. On her way home, she runs into Kanzo again and tries to avoid him. He follows her for a bit, and she tells him to go away before she calls the cops. He tells her that's fine, since he doesn't have anything anymore, but decides to leave her alone anyways. Acknowledging he got fired for embezzlement, just to get money to spend time with her, Suyuko jokingly mocks him for having stolen only 100,000 yen, and not more, to which he agrees. She then invites him to come live with her, feeling somewhat guilty for his situation. Here they enter into a sort of pretend marriage, with him taking care of the household chores and her going out to earn money working at the nightclub. This is an incredible look at the changes taking place in Japanese society at the time by Suzuki. At a time where ever so slightly more and more opportunities were ostensibly opening up for women in the Japanese economy during the economic miracle of the 60s, much of these roles were exploitative. And while Suyuko has become the breadwinner, taking care of Kanzo, who used to be a well-off established man, she's doing so at the sale of her own time and body. While in any capitalist society, workers and laborers of all sorts sell their time and bodies to employers, we see that Suyuko's so-called elevated position comes from her, shall we say, womanly commodification. Kanzo even makes engagement rings out of some of the curtain hangers that had fallen for the two of them to wear, which Suyuko genuinely seems to appreciate. It seems like things are genuinely going great for the couple, despite shady beginnings to say the least. It's at this point, Suyuko decides to check out the modeling agency. Club Dada let her know that she could return at any time she wanted, and so she's exploring her options. She's become a real city girl, embracing the fast-paced life around her. In the waiting room of the modeling agency, we see several women sitting in chairs, legs tilted, dolled up, faces behind magazines. A glance into the highly competitive world of fashion modeling. All these women dart their eyes at Suyuko, seeing her as a fish out of water, and as their new competition. Their jealousy flares when Suyuko is brought in by the headmistress ahead of all of them, due to her connection with Ineko, who works at the agency. The manager admires her for her figure and shares her plans to turn Suyuko into an outstanding model. She accepts the position gladly and makes her way home. Once there, in a funny scene, she scolds Kanzo for hanging her underwear out to dry. In another cute scene, she asks him if he thinks she can make it as a model, and he supports her all the way. The next day at work, Suyuko's new employer invites her to come live with her. Considering her work as a model will pay considerably less than that of a cabaret hostess, leaving her unable to pay for her apartment. Suyuko agrees to this arrangement and then heads back home. Suyuko informs Kanzo of the switch and how, due to her changing jobs, she wouldn't be able to support him as her live-in boyfriend anymore. And, in a rather heartbreaking scene, Kanzo admits that he knew that being with a woman like Suyuko would be like a dream, ecstatic but fleeting, and he readily accepts their split up. But just then, Suyuko requests that he yell and scream at her, saying she couldn't leave him if he let her go so graciously. Kanzo says there's no reason for him to be angry with her, as he lets his wedding ring float down the drain. But Suyuko won't let it go. She insists. She feels bad letting a man like that go, now seeing just how much he truly enjoyed being with her, finally getting to know the true man underneath. And despite the fact that he's kind of a loser, he was one of the first men to truly appreciate her. Kanzo, understanding now what Suyuko wants, goes into a contrived, pretended tirade, yelling at her, calling her names, and she returns the favor as the two pack their bags, ready to move. And just as Kanzo leaves the apartment, we see the true sadness in his face at their breakup. With his previous acceptance of it, clearly a brave face he was putting on for Suyuko and for himself. This is one of the most powerful scenes in the movie, as it shows how much societal expectations weigh on them and on all of us. Breakups are supposed to be these heavy, traumatic incidents. And if the breakup isn't clean and swift as possible, it makes it hard to move on. As much as we might claim to want to end things on good terms, if our society tells us this isn't the right way to do it, it might not feel real. In a changing society, women and men feel that weight shifting between old expectations and new potential ways of living. From employment to entertainment, down to our most intimate relationships and moments with each other, expectations get in the way of experiencing situations as they really truly are. Suyuko cries after Kanzo leaves, before the scene shifts into her new living arrangement with her manager. Living now with the headmistress of the fashion agency, Suyuko carries out mainly domestic duties. While bringing her lunch, she walks in on the headmistress changing, which makes the woman uncharacteristically bashful. There's a ring at the door, and a man by the name of Seiji Tanako, an associate of the headmistress. We get a scene hinting that Seiji and the headmistress might be, shall I say, more than associates, before she heads out, entrusting Suyuko with the house for the day. She goes to make the now disheveled bed and begins to chat with Seiji, who asks her how it is living with the headmistress. Suyuko says it's fine, but Seiji warns her that the headmistress is a lesbian and may have taken a liking to her. There were some scenes throughout the film that, upon rewatch, hint at this certainly, but through the rest of Suyuko's time with the woman, this becomes blatantly clear, with the headmistress really coming onto her heavy. Suyuko turns down her advances, just as Seiji predicted. Seiji then offers to clean her lips with a kiss, prompting the headmistress to kick the both of them out. As Suyuko prepares to leave, the headmistress tries one last effort to win her over, but Suyuko refuses and promptly leaves with Seiji. This film, for all that's great about it, falls into an unfortunate trap of portraying same-sex attraction into its negative, sort of predatory light. Seiji's comments that the headmistress seemed to prefer women due to her inability to keep a man speak more to the suffocating gender roles and expectations and how individuals of all status and rank seem to suffer as they try to navigate. The only one who doesn't seem to suffer, it seems, is Seiji himself. Seiji isn't attracted to Tsuyuko, despite having kissed her, and seems to be her first platonic male friend in the movie. He lets her stay at his place as long as she needs, considering she just lost her modeling job just as soon as she had found it. This gives Tsuyuko a much-needed break, and the time to finally explore Osaka, which up to this point she hadn't had the opportunity to do. Since she had arrived in the city, her main focus was working and providing for herself. Lost in the rat race, or what might be more aptly called the meat grinder, she never had the time for herself and decided to go explore Osaka. While riding the bus, she runs into Bon, her high school boyfriend from earlier in the film. We find out Bon dropped out of college and is trying to strike it on his own as an onsen, or a hot spring owner. Tsuyuko, glad to be with him again, is down to go wherever he wants to go. And so, saying her goodbyes to Seiji, she moves in with Bon. At first, it seems like a great idea, until we see that Bon is living in utter squalor by the river. To make matters worse, everyone Bon runs his hot spring idea by is naturally skeptical, so he has trouble raising the necessary funding. But Tsuyuko is determined to make this work. She's with her first love after all. She even makes herself at home with all of her beautiful outfits hung on his bare walls. As Tsuyuko sits, glad to be with her man again, Seiji comes by to visit, as she had forgot something at his place. Learning about this Bon character some more, Seiji thinks he's a grifter, but still offers to help the couple come up with some money for the hot spring. He introduces Tsuyuko to a wealthy business owner who wants to take her into his service, as it were, which she naturally finds degrading. But in any case, she runs the idea past Bon, who reluctantly agrees, as they'll be able to get the money they need for their project. Tsuyuko later moves into an apartment given to her by the man and has to perform for him, things like strutting around the living room naked. But Bon isn't satisfied and wants more money. He goes to Tsuyuko's benefactor, demanding a loan, to which the man refuses. The man then strikes a deal with Bon, offering him the money if he and Tsuyuko star in an adult film. Much to Tsuyuko's dismay, he chooses to go through with this, coercing her along the way. In the end, the two naturally break up. Thus, the end of another good-for-nothing man. This, as you can expect, pushes Tsuyuko further to her breaking point. After all, if her first love could treat her like this, then who could she trust? Tsuyuko receives the money, but at this point is utterly disillusioned with the world of men. She receives the money for the film and brings it to Bon's place. Bon isn't there, however, so she leaves the check and takes part of a picture of the two of them, as well as a newspaper from his place. When she gets back to Seiji's place, we learn that Bon had died in a disagreement over some money he had owed someone else. Soon after, we find out that her benefactor had also perished in a plane crash, so the apartment now belongs to her in full, and she chooses to sell it rather than keep it and all the haunting memories of it. Tsuyuko's flush with cash, but at what cost? Her dignity, her self-respect, her trust in men, her faith that maybe this world could maybe be a good place, utterly trashed, and all she has to show for it is money. Tsuyuko's rage against men erupts when she gets a call that her father had passed away, so she decides to pay Kawachi a visit after all this time. Tsuyuko's gone on a hero's journey of her own, having gone to the city to achieve greatness, falling into traps and plot holes along the way. She even had a mentor of sorts in Seiji, and now comes back with the money made off her own exploitation. It's not quite the girl boss trajectory you would expect, but Tsuyuko hasn't lost her will. If anything, she's become even more ironclad in the face of the fires she's had to endure. Back in Kawachi, Tsuyuko meets with her mother, distraught over the passing of her father. She gives her mother enough money for a proper burial, and then some. We then see Tsuyuko's sister, Senko, sneaking home, followed by the dirty priest from before, holding one of her bras. We learn that their mother had essentially rented her daughter out to the priest, to Tsuyuko's absolute disgust. Tsuyuko decides if her father is gone and her mother is worthless, unable to protect her sister, she must take matters into her own hands. Tsuyuko's struggles here remind me of those of my own older sister, and the many of the women out there who find themselves bearing the brunt of dysfunctional families. Tsuyuko's plan revolves around coaxing the priest into a valley near their home, high above a waterfall, allegedly in search of a location Bon wished to build his onsen. On their way up, while on some rocks, slippery and wet from the nearby waterfall, the priest steals Tsuyuko's ring right off her finger during a difficult part of their passage. And at the very top, Tsuyuko almost falls, but the priest helps her back up. The priest then tries to attack Tsuyuko, but she resists, and in fighting back, pushes him off the top of the waterfall, down below. After his tragic passing, she runs home to let her mother know, who fears the priest's ghostly retribution. This causes Tsuyuko to finally snap. Tsuyuko resolves to leave Kawachi for good. Before she leaves, however, she pleads with her mother to let go of the past and to not be lonely. She also prays to her father's spirit, hoping that he can pass on to the next life and live in peace, now that the priest is no longer terrorizing their family. It is at this point we get to the thesis of our film. Tsuyuko's mother says that she won't be lonely, and if she does get lonely, She's a woman, just like Suyuko, and she can go find a cure for her loneliness as a woman. A light bulb goes off in Suyuko's head, and she decides to move to Tokyo. In the final scene, we get a letter from Suyuko to Seiji, saying that she's been seeing a lot of men, and that she's keeping an eye out for a really good one. Seiji doubts there are any good men in the world, but promises to let her know if he finds one. The film closes with our Carmen from Kawachi dancing in the streets of Tokyo with a flower between her teeth. The film avoids the sort of men bad narrative that, while I imagine can be appealing and cathartic to some women, and to be really honest with you, I can't blame them, gives us an easy way out. Carmen is excited to get back in the field again, to meet a new man, and potentially, out of all the good-for-nothing examples shown to us in the film, find herself a good one. What was once a plucky, happy-go-lucky country girl grew into a woman ready to take on the city, take on the world. And rather than rising above and taking a coveted spot in a quote-unquote man's world, Suyuko was able to successfully carve out her own space. The dignity she acquired, torn from the fires of human cruelty, is unassailable, and her newfound confidence isn't that of a naive child. She's a grown woman in her own right, who knows what she can handle, who knows what she can do, and who knows what she brings to the world. Carmen from Kawachi is a harrowing tale of a young woman growing in a rapidly changing society. Themes of gendered expectations, what women's and men's places are in the world, and even the foundation of the family, are ahead of their time, and maybe our time, in this film. If I had to compare Suyuko to anyone, it would be the aforementioned Elle Woods from Legally Blonde, although Suyuko's story is a lot darker. Elle embarked on a journey of her own to become a lawyer, at first to impress her ex-boyfriend and win him back, but by the end, he's dying to be with her again, while she's moved on. I think it's a good movie, meant to be much more fun of course, and tackles the subject of women's empowerment in a completely different way. Another more recent example, of course, would be Barbie from 2024, which presented a sort of role reversal, where Barbie had all the jobs, all the money, while the Kens were homeless and lived on the beach. This movie was also meant to be much more fun, and so it doesn't present the subject matter as nuanced as we get as in Carmen from Kawachi. Suyuko, of course, has her fun too, but she has to resist against a much more exploitative society without losing herself. A post-war society where roles are changing due to economic pressures rather than a fun what-if. In Carmen from Kawachi, we get men and women corrupted, exploiting one another, being exploited as Japan transitions from the ashes of a former empire into a vassal of the United States. As their society adapted to cutthroat capitalism, some rose to the top, and the vast many, men and women, sank into hell. So why do feminist films in the US often, in my opinion, take the easy way out? The main reason why a lot of films with feminist themes in the US fail to hit the nail on the head and to hit these points is precisely due to the relationship of capitalism to the United States. In my opinion, any kind of genuine feminist critique needs to take place in the context of labor. And while we do have people discussing things like the gender pay gap, representations of women in upper echelons of corporations and the government, the fact of the matter is the vast majority of women are part of the working class. They're not lawyers, they're not doctors, and they're not the whole host of careers that Barbie has, but many of them are exploited in the way that Suyuko was in the film. In this unflinching look at a story of one woman moving through a rapidly changing society, we get a much bleaker and yet much more hopeful image of what a woman is and what a woman's life can be. Rather than rising above it all, achieving a sort of status where their womanhood doesn't matter, rather than sinking to their lowest, committing all types of crimes, both of which to me seem like women aspiring to take on positions that they see men holding in the world. Carmen from Kawachi presents us a story of a woman living, loving, suffering, succeeding, and thriving as a woman, in a way that a woman can. This is why I feel like Carmen's victory at the end is a true victory. Of course, I'm a man, and I don't know what it's like to be a woman. But to be honest, to me, it's sad to see a woman swear off men because of previous traumatic experiences, even if it is understandable. And I'm not here to tell anybody how to feel, those are my thoughts. So to see Suyuko at the end, pushing through her heartbreak, excited to see what kinds of men there are out there in the world, gives me hope. Rather than fall too far into the girl boss badass trope, Suzuki paints a uniquely beautiful portrait of another form of success. Feminism, after all, is a political movement about changing the relationship to the feminine in a male-dominated society. So why should women be restricted simply to imagining themselves in the positions of power, authority, and prestige carved out in that male-dominated society? I'm not a woman, and I'm not a feminist either. But one hope I have for the feminist movement is that instead it can reveal to us an entirely new way of living, new ways of thinking that we hadn't even considered before. My hope is that through feminist-oriented media, we as a society can learn how to answer that question, often asked, and often much more suppressed. What is a woman? Because it's not as simple as you think. Seijun Suzuki is an incredible director, and I appreciate the effort he put into making this film. even though it ended up being one of his less appreciated ones. The well-written characters, the curious set design, and one of the most unique stories I've ever seen. If you're tired of simplistic narratives in films, this forgotten gem just might be perfect for you. In this video, we dove into Carmen from Kawachi and how it strays from typical feminist narratives in films. But there are much more prominent Japanese movies with much more profound impacts on the movie industry. If you like these sorts of deep dives, I go into arguably the most famous one, Rashomon, as well as the Rashomon effect and the impact that that movie has had on Hollywood as well. See you over there.